My stepsister texted me 70 pictures of them in bed, and her message said, I am his next wife. So I ensured those pictures made her into a celebrity. Okay, let me tell you something that still sends shivers down my spine. Imagine this, you're asleep, it's 2:21 a.m., and a text message wakes you up. But it's not just any text. It's from your stepsister, and it calmly declares, I'm Glenn's next wife. What would you do? Because that's exactly how the wildest 72 hours of my life began, shattering everything I thought I knew. Back then, I was Meredith Hayes, 42, a senior editor living in a quiet Cincinnati suburb. I thought I had the perfect life with my 7-year-old daughter, Gail, and my husband, Glenn. Husband. That's the word I used then. Now? I'm not even sure what to call him. That night, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Glenn wasn't home, of course, another business dinner that ran late, a story I was sadly used to. But when I squinted at the screen, it was a number I knew instantly, my stepsister, Valerie. Valerie. That name used to just be an annoying reminder of my dad's remarriage, bringing this entitled, spoiled 20-something into my already complicated life. Now, it just tastes like acid. I opened the message. The first one was stark, brutal, I'm Glenn's next wife. I blinked. Once, twice. It was like reading a joke with no punchline. The rain was hitting the window, a distant, muffled sound. Then the flood came. Photo after photo. Not blurry, grainy shots, but high-quality, intimate pictures, dinner dates, weekend getaways, hotel room selfies. Her hand tucked in his pocket. His arm around her shoulder. A cold, solid understanding settled in my gut, long before the pain hit. 70 photos. 70 pieces of evidence. I could have screamed. I could have cried, thrown the phone, woken Gail who was sleeping so peacefully beside me. But that wasn't my style. I pressed mute so the notifications wouldn't wake her. And then, in the dark, I looked at every single one. This wasn't a quick glance. This was a methodical, terrifying inventory. There he was, holding a wineglass with that smug half-smile he used to give me when I suggested a nice dinner. There she was, wearing his faded college hoodie, the one I'd folded and put in his drawer that very morning. The sheer audacity of it all. She was flaunting my entire life back at me. They weren't hiding. They were smiling straight into the camera, challenging me. I zoomed in, looking for details, the expensive watch he wore, the leather bag on the floor of a hotel room. Then, one photo. That was the moment emotional betrayal became a legal strategy. It wasn't what they were doing, but what was in the background, a blurry, but unmistakable business sign. Our business sign. The logo of the auto shop we co-owned. It told me everything. The money for those weekend getaways? It didn't come from some magic vault. It came from our joint accounts, the funds meant for Gail's college, for expanding our business, for our future. It was financing this sick, little affair with my stepsister. The level of malice, the arrogance to send those photos to me, expecting tears, expecting me to crumble. They didn't send me heartbreak. They sent me ammunition. I downloaded every single image. Immediately. I used a separate app to check timestamps and GPS data. I labeled them, Exhibit A, financial abuse. Exhibit B, infidelity. Exhibit C, ethical violation. The thought of losing any of it filled me with a primal dread. I had to secure this. It was 3:45 a.m. I called Colleen, my friend and lawyer. I knew she'd be awake. She picked up on the second ring, her voice tight, professional. Meredith, what is it? That picture I sent you, I said, my voice flat, almost monotone. It's all true. And it's my stepsister, Valerie. 70 of them. I'm sending you the cloud link now. I need an emergency consultation, first thing. Colleen sighed. Oh, Meredith, I'm so sorry. But you're right. This is good. This is proof. We can move fast on the divorce. She paused. I'm focusing on two things: securing the business assets, since you're a co-owner and contributed your inheritance, and ensuring full custody of Gail. That level of reckless behavior, especially using company funds, looks terrible to a judge. What's his financial situation outside the business? I don't know, I admitted. I handled the books, but he controlled the cash flow. That's the problem. He's been taking out money for suppliers lately. But that picture, the one with the shop sign, it shows him at that resort we looked at last year. The one he said we couldn't afford. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. He can afford it for her, though. Right, Colleen said, her voice firm. I'm starting the financial deep dive now. Get some rest, Meredith. Or at least get dressed. I'll see you at 8 a.m. Don't engage with him. Do not mention the messages. Act normal. Act normal, I repeated to the empty room. I hung up and sat on the edge of the bed. I had maybe 3 hours before Glenn came home. I used every single minute. I quietly gathered every financial statement I could find, anything related to the business's tax filings, our joint accounts. I put them all in a messenger bag, ready for Colleen. I even made 2 copies of the deed to the house. I looked at Gail, her chest rising and falling softly. A surge of pure maternal resolve. She needed my strength now. Not Glenn, not Valerie, certainly not the marriage. I slipped out of my pajamas and into a dark, structured outfit. I looked in the mirror. My face was pale, but my eyes were steady. The woman staring back was no longer the one who had swallowed her pain for years. She was a professional, and she was about to go to work. For years, I told myself the quiet life was the good life. 10 years ago, I thought I had everything: a decent home, a hard-working husband, or so I thought, a new baby, and the beginnings of a solid small business. Glenn and I met in college. He was magnetic, always the guy with a plan, the center of every room. I, the quiet editor, was drawn to that fire. He said he wanted a simple life, a family life, and I believed him. We started small, bought a modest house, opened the auto repair shop together. I managed all the back-end accounts, payroll, marketing, everything that made a business run, while he handled the mechanics and customer work. I even secured initial funding using a small inheritance from my mother. The first 2 years of our marriage were smooth, but then Gail was born. That's when the tectonic plates really started shifting. Newborns are tough on a marriage, I know that. But where I saw an opportunity to bond, Glenn saw an excuse to retreat. He started coming home later, saying he needed to clear his head or that the shop was swamped. He claimed the crying kept him up at night, so he moved to the guest room for better sleep. I remember packing his pillows and toothbrush, trying to make it seem like a temporary necessity, a sacrifice for his high-salary job. But as I closed that guest room door, the finality of it felt like a cold premonition. I didn't argue. I thought it was temporary. I thought I was being the understanding wife, the supportive partner. My own mother, bless her practical soul, had warned me once, years ago, Meredith, honey, when couples stop sharing a bed, they slowly stop sharing a life. I'd laughed her off, called her old-fashioned. But looking back at those empty sheets, I could only hear her voice. And then there was Valerie, my stepsister. She came into my life when my dad remarried. Instantly troubled, 10 years younger than me, she never worked a day in her life, always relying on my stepmother's or my father's money. She was supposed to be in art college down in Florida, but she'd show up in Ohio for long visits. Always charming Glenn, complimenting his ambition, making him feel like the big shot she thought he was. It was always awkward, but I dismissed it as Valerie being Valerie, needy and attention-seeking. I never, not for a second, thought she'd be sharing Glenn's bed. Then there was Glenn's mother, Beverly. She lived 2 blocks away and dropped by more than I ever wanted. At first, she offered to help with Gail, but it quickly morphed into constant, draining criticism. She'd sigh dramatically if I bottle-fed Gail. She'd comment if my hair wasn't perfectly styled or if dinner was late. Beverly had this way of speaking that always made it sound like she was doing me a huge favor by tolerating me. According to her, Glenn had been an angel as a child. Polite, perfect, mature beyond his years. So every time Gail threw a tantrum or didn't want to kiss Grandma goodnight, I could practically hear Beverly blaming me under her breath. One day, Beverly came over unannounced. I was struggling to get Gail to eat her vegetables, and Gail, being Gail, was throwing a mini fit. Beverly watched, arms crossed, judging. Then she leaned in, right in front of Gail, and said with that sickly sweet voice a child learns from her mother, "If Gail's difficult, maybe you should look in the mirror." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her to get out of my house and never come back. But I didn't. I was tired, worn down from pretending, from waiting for Glenn to care again, from hoping I hadn't wasted the best years of my life. I kept hoping. People do that when they've invested too much, when they're scared of starting over, or when they worry about custody battles. But the time never came for us. Glenn didn't touch me anymore. We hadn't had a real conversation in months. His birthday came and went. I planned a nice dinner, bought a cake, even dressed up in that navy dress he used to like. He texted at 6 p.m. he wouldn't be home until late. I waited. The food went cold. He never ate a bite. Then small things started going missing. Expensive diagnostic tools from the shop, bought with the business account. A tablet I used for bookkeeping. A simple silver bracelet my mother had given me. Glenn always had a reason. A client needed a loaner, he was updating inventory, Gail probably moved it. But deep down, I knew better. He was selling things. He was using funds. I thought maybe we just needed space. A short trip, a counselor, something to get us back to who we were. I brought it up once, nervously, in the car. He laughed. Not a funny laugh. A cold one, like dry ice hitting water. Then he said, "You're too sensitive, Meredith. Stop acting like something's wrong just because life isn't romantic every minute." That shut me down completely. I nodded. I smiled. I agreed. But inside, another crack appeared. I didn't see it then, but I was already shrinking. Shrinking myself to keep the peace. Biting my tongue, swallowing my needs, pretending things were fine. And he saw that. Men like Glenn, they can sense when you've decided to stay no matter what. That's when they stop trying. By year 5, we were roommates. I made excuses for him. He made excuses to avoid me. Beverly's visits increased, her voice louder, her judgment sharper. I was tired. Worn down from waiting for him to care, from hoping. And then came that night. The message. The photos. The proof. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I had been replaced. Not just replaced, but humiliated by my own stepsister. But what Glenn and Valerie didn't know was that they had just sent all their evidence straight to someone who was no longer willing to stay quiet. I looked at those 70 photos not as heartbreak, but as hard, irrefutable evidence. Every lie he told, every moment he stole, now captured, filed, ready to use. For the first time in years, I felt something different. Clarity. Not pain, not fear, just the steady pulse of a woman who had finally stopped hoping and started preparing. It was a dark kind of freedom, a terrifying promotion to the head of my own survival. The night Glenn came home, I was still awake. It was almost 5 a.m. I heard his keys rattle against the ceramic bowl I'd made in a pottery class our first year of marriage. It used to be a symbol of our shared life. Now it just sounded hollow. Gail stirred next to me. I gently patted her back, kissed her forehead, keeping my breathing even, pretending to be asleep. From the hallway, his voice cut through the dark. Meredith? He sounded normal. Too normal. Like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just spent the night with my stepsister. I didn't answer. I didn't want him to hear the shake in my voice, the steel I was forging in my gut. He moved down the hallway, reeking of cheap cologne and the unmistakable scent of whiskey. I heard the shuffle of his shoes, the thump of his jacket hitting the floor, then the sound of the shower running. Always the shower. Like he could rinse off whatever sins he'd racked up that night. When he finished, he didn't come to our room. He hadn't slept in our bed in over 2 years. I let it go. That night, I didn't follow him. I stayed where I was, holding Gail. I stared at the ceiling, counting the seconds between each drip from the bathroom faucet. Each one felt louder than the last. I didn't sleep a wink. By morning, Gail's little fingers touched my face. "Mommy, wake up." Her breath smelled like strawberries. I kissed her cheek and got up. We padded into the kitchen together, just the two of us. That's when Beverly appeared. She was already there, like a villain who knew the show was about to start. Her hair freshly dyed, teased high like she was going to a church banquet, black curls shining like plastic. She didn't say good morning. She never did. "You're just getting up now?" she said, frowning at my pajamas. "The child's probably starving." "I've been up for hours already." Gail ducked behind my leg. I reached down and squeezed her hand. "I don't want Grandma," she mumbled in her soft little voice. Beverly's lips thinned. "This child is so mean. No idea where she gets that temper from." Glenn was always an angel. I didn't respond. I walked past her and pulled out the eggs from the fridge. Normally, I'd pretend not to hear. I'd ignore her. But not today. Today, I cracked eggs into a bowl, stared at the yellow swirl, and said, flat as stone, "Beverly, can you shut your mouth?" There was a long silence. She froze by the hallway, stunned. Her mouth literally hung open. "What did you just say, Meredith? Are you feeling all right?" I slammed the knife down twice on the cutting board and turned around slowly. I said, "Shut your mouth. I am feeling perfectly clear, thank you." She blinked. Her bright red lipstick trembled for a second. She looked like a balloon someone had let go of mid-inflation. I made breakfast for Gail and me. Just us. 2 plates. No third. I meticulously buttered Gail's toast, focusing on the simple, practical act. Beverly, still reeling, waddled down the hallway, pounded on Glenn's door, and sang, "Glenn, breakfast is ready," like it was 1950. She was desperately clinging to her role as the perfect homemaker's mother. By the time Glenn stumbled into the kitchen in his robe, smelling of soap and shame, Gail and I were already dressed and stepping out the front door. "Where's breakfast?" "I have a big meeting this morning," he asked, his voice rough and entitled. I didn't answer. Gail looked up at me and said, "Daddy didn't get any." "Nope," I said. "Mommy makes breakfast for Gail. Daddy's mommy can make breakfast for Daddy now. We are moving on to better things, sweetie." Gail nodded like it all made perfect sense to her. We got into the car. The drive to school was quiet, the air thick with my new resolve. As I watched her skip toward the door, I realized something deep and clear. This wasn't just about cheating. This was about all the years I gave. All the times I was quiet. All the times I fed everyone else first and let myself go hungry. Not anymore. I felt lighter than I had in years. Like I had finally shed a heavy, ugly skin. I drove straight to Colleen's office. The conversation was purely professional, focusing only on the divorce proceedings. She had already pulled up preliminary reports on the business assets. Glenn's salary has been inflated over the last year, Meredith, Colleen said, tapping a printout. He's been essentially paying himself exorbitant bonuses that you didn't approve, claiming it was for equipment, when it clearly went to fund Valerie's lifestyle. We have him dead to rights on financial misconduct, especially since he commingled the money with the funds from your inheritance. I saw that in the books, I said, but I couldn't prove where the money went. He'd call it supplier costs. It was all disguised. I need to make sure I get full control of the business to clean up his mess, and full custody of Gail. We're going for a full settlement, Meredith, Colleen confirmed. Majority stake in the business and full custody of Gail. His recklessness with business funds while you were home raising his child is indefensible in court. The judge will look at the inheritance you put in and see his behavior as gross financial negligence. We need to be the picture of calm, controlled reason. We went over the strategy for an hour, detailing exactly how I needed to act, calm, unemotional, focused only on the facts. I had to become a stone. When I got back home after dropping Gail off and meeting with Colleen, Glenn and Beverly were waiting for me in the living room. I walked in and immediately noticed the silence, tight and tense, like the room was holding its breath. Beverly had powdered her face so heavily it looked like she was trying to bury her own expression. Her lipstick was bright red, too red for morning. She looked like someone playing dress-up, someone who didn't know how to be taken seriously without a performance. Glenn was slouched deep into the couch, arms crossed like a rebellious teenager. He didn't even try to hide the smug look on his face, the look of a man who thought I was too weak to leave. You really made breakfast just for yourself? Beverly snapped first. What kind of wife does that? Are you trying to starve your husband? I looked at her, then at Glenn, then back again. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, took a slow sip. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to cry. I had the facts, and that was all the power I needed. I made breakfast for me and for Gail, I said, calmly returning to the living room. Not for Glenn. And haven't you always said my cooking was terrible? I thought he deserved better this morning. Perhaps your cooking is better suited for him. Glenn shifted in his seat, obviously confused by my lack of hysteria. He was expecting a meltdown. I gave them silence. They wanted to fight. I gave them questions. They thought they had power. I was about to show them how little they actually had. What's that supposed to mean, Meredith? Are you going somewhere with this? Glenn finally managed. You tell me, I replied. I'm just asking simple questions about your daily routine. Beverly's voice wobbled. Are you saying you don't want this marriage anymore? You're going to throw everything away. You'll ruin your daughter's life. I smiled a little. Maybe that's a question you should be asking your son and your stepdaughter. They seem to have made decisions for me. Glenn sat up straighter. He wasn't used to my use of Valerie's name. I walked past them, sat down, and pulled out my phone. I selected 2 of the clearest photos from the night before, one at the hotel pool, the other in the expensive car Glenn had bought Valerie, and sent them straight to the family group chat. I didn't even look at their faces as the notifications started pinging instantly. Glenn's older sister called within seconds. His cousin responded with a shocked face emoji. Even his uncle, who usually only sent dad jokes, replied with a long series of question marks. Glenn lunged toward me, his face red with panic and rage. What the hell is wrong with you? Why would you do that? I stepped back, holding out my hand. No yelling. Gail's at school. Let's not behave like teenagers. You did the dirty laundry, Glenn. I'm just making sure it's aired out. He clenched his jaw, fists curled. Beverly stood up, ready to jump in. You're ruining your own family, she hissed, posting dirty laundry like some drama queen. You should be ashamed. I turned to her. You want to talk about dirty laundry? Let's talk about how your son's credit card was used to buy a hotel room for a girl half his age, my stepsister. Or how the business you're so proud of is being used to fund weekend trips and designer handbags, money that should be securing Gail's college fund. Beverly's eyes narrowed. You think you're clever? You'll be left with nothing. No, I said. I'm thorough. And I will be left with everything I earned. Just then, Colleen knocked on the door and stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. She was wearing her usual calm, sharp look, a stack of files in her hand. Hello again, Glenn, she said coolly. Beverly. Glenn frowned. Why is she here? I haven't agreed to. A lawyer yet. Because, I said, this conversation is no longer personal. It's legal. Colleen handed Glenn a document. These are copies of your company's financial records. 7 years' worth. We traced every expense related to Valerie from the moment she mysteriously reappeared in your life. The hotel charges, the flights, the new car, the condo lease, all of it. Glenn stared at the pages like they were written in a language he couldn't read. And since you've been using joint assets in Meredith's initial inheritance to fund this, Colleen continued, her voice perfectly level, Meredith is entitled to a fair share. A very fair share, especially considering the fraud involved in inflating your supposed salary. Beverly's face paled. You're going to ruin your own husband. He'll never get another salary that high. You'll be poor. I shook my head. He already did that himself. I'm just making sure he cleans up after the mess. And I'll worry about my own salary. I have my own promotion coming up. The confrontation lasted another hour. Glenn kept trying to justify his actions, blaming me for being too focused on Gail or the business accounts. Colleen simply refuted every single argument with a date, an expense report, or a direct quote from one of Valerie's messages that I had saved. We discussed the divorce terms, custody arrangements for Gail, and the division of the auto shop. It was all cold, hard business. The entire time, Beverly tried to interrupt, offering useless advice and excuses for her son. But Colleen shut her down every time, reminding her she wasn't a party to the legal discussions. Meredith, this is the first step, Colleen said, gathering her papers. Don't speak to him unless absolutely necessary. No emotional responses. We need him to feel isolated and overwhelmed by the facts. His recklessness is what's destroying him, not us. I understand, I said. Isolation was what he gave me for years. Now he'd get a taste of his own medicine. I felt a surge of cold satisfaction. After the confrontation, I didn't speak to Glenn again for 2 full days. I made myself unavailable. Not angry, not emotional, just silent. That silence made him nervous. During that time, Colleen and I put together everything, financials, emails, messages. But what caught Colleen's attention the most was a small detail in one of those 70 photos Valerie had sent me. In the corner, behind their little romantic breakfast setup on a patio, was a building with the distinct logo of Eastern Lakes University. That was the university where the Glenn Hayes Scholarship Foundation worked. He had started the program a few years ago to help underprivileged students with promise. That's how he described it in his pompous local interviews. I sat across from Colleen at her office, stirring my coffee. Do you think she's one of the students? It makes sense why she was always hanging around. Colleen nodded. It's the only logical explanation for why he'd be spending so much time there and using the business name to cover it. The ethical violation is huge. Only one way to find out. We made the call to the university, introducing ourselves as key co-founders of the scholarship fund, which was technically true. I did the writing for the promotional materials, the legal paperwork, ensuring all the tax filings were correct. Glenn just showed up to smile at events and hand out the big checks. The concept of the college fund was my idea, rooted in my own background. Within a day, we had an appointment to speak with Professor Stanley, the program head. The campus was just an hour away, a beautiful drive in early spring, the trees just starting to bloom. Driving past all those young students, I felt something pull at me. A version of myself I hadn't seen in years. Young, hopeful, still believing life was fair. Still believing in the value of education and hard work. I was the one who went to college on a partial scholarship. I knew what that kind of help meant. I remembered the long nights writing essays, the excitement of my first salary job, the sacrifice I made putting my inheritance into Glenn's business. To see Glenn potentially corrupting that, abusing the trust of the university, it made my blood run cold. It wasn't just personal anymore. It was public corruption, an attack on everything I valued. Professor Stanley greeted us warmly, shaking my hand with both of his. "We're honored you came, Mrs. Hayes," he said. "The work your family has done here, it's changed lives. The college fund you've established is truly making a difference. We are very careful with the disbursements." I forced a polite smile and nodded. "We just want to make sure the support is going to the right students and that all the ethical guidelines are being followed. We're doing an internal check on the integrity of the process." He brought out several folders and began showing us profiles. One stood out right away: Valerie M., literature major, top 5% of her class, represented the university in multiple academic competitions, volunteered at the campus library, part-time job off campus. "She's truly special," Professor Stanley said, his voice full of pride. "Has overcome so much. The kind of student you dream of helping. She's been a model recipient. Her application was sponsored personally by Glenn." I exchanged a look with Colleen. "Is Valerie on campus today, Professor?" He picked up his desk phone, dialed quickly, then frowned. "She's taken a sick day. Said she's not feeling well. A bad flu. Very contagious." I let my voice drip with concern. "Oh no, that's unfortunate. Do you know where she's staying? We always ensure our scholarship recipients have access to the best care. We need to make sure we're covered from a liability standpoint, you understand?" "Actually," he said, checking a note, "she's been admitted to the university's partnered hospital for rest. She mentioned flu symptoms." I stood up immediately. "Let's go visit her. Colleen and I have an hour before our next meeting. It's the least we can do. I'm her stepsister, after all." The professor hesitated. "Are you sure? It might be intrusive. It is the flu, after all." I smiled a wide, convincing smile. "We're family, Professor Stanley. I'm her stepsister. I'm sure she'll appreciate the gesture. We need to check on our college fund recipient personally." We drove in silence. Colleen looked at me a few times but didn't say much. I think she was letting me lead, sensing I needed to do this for myself. I wasn't doing this for spectacle. I just knew I needed to look her in the eyes, to see the face that had betrayed me twice over, once as a stepsister and once as a rival. The hospital wing was quiet, filled with the scent of antiseptic. We walked down the corridor until we found room 333. Colleen stopped me just before the door. "Meredith, look closer." I looked. Beside the number was a small placard. It read, "Maternity Ward." "She's not here for the flu," Colleen whispered, her eyes wide. I nodded once, then knocked gently and opened the door. Valerie was in the bed, pale and tired-looking. Her hair was in a messy bun. She didn't have makeup on. She looked nothing like the smiling girl in the 70 photos. She was just a young woman, scared and alone. She was barely 22. When she saw me, her betrayed stepsister, the woman she thought she'd crushed, her eyes widened. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Professor Stanley stepped in behind us, looking confused. "Valerie," he said kindly. This is Mrs. Meredith Hayes. She helped establish the scholarship you've been receiving. Valerie sat up slowly. I didn't know. I didn't think. I sat down in the chair beside her bed. I had to look her in the eyes. I had to be the calm, terrifying force in the room. You look awful, Valerie, I said softly. Are you okay? You said you had the flu. She swallowed hard. I just have a cold. Nothing serious. I'll be back on campus soon. Colleen glanced around the room, then stepped out into the hallway and looked both ways, making sure she had an audience. She came back in and said, just loud enough for others nearby to hear, interesting choice to house a contagious flu patient in the maternity wing. That's a huge violation of health codes. A murmur began to rise from the hallway. Doors cracked open. Other patients started asking questions. Why is someone with the flu here? My newborn's immune system is weak. This is supposed to be the VIP wing. Nurses scrambled to contain the noise. One young nurse blurted out, trying to restore order, she's not sick. She's here for prenatal care. It's a complication with her blood pressure. The hallway went dead silent. Inside the room, Valerie's face turned the color of chalk. Colleen leaned over and said in a low voice, now that the room's awake, shall we talk about your baby, Valerie? Valerie bit her lip so hard it looked like it might bleed. Professor Stanley looked between us, stunned. Valerie, is this true? A baby? And you lied about the flu? She nodded once, slowly, shame visible in the simple movement. I asked the final, devastating question. Is it Glenn's? She said nothing, just pulled the blanket up to her chin and looked away, refusing to meet my gaze. That was answer enough. Colleen looked at the professor, her voice sharp and legal. Given the nature of their relationship, there are serious ethical implications here. He's sponsoring a student he's sleeping with, a student who also happens to be his wife's stepsister. This is a massive conflict of interest. He blinked, the realization of the scandal hitting him all at once. You mean she's one of our students and he's her sponsor and the father? Yes, Colleen finished. Her mentor, her landlord, the supplier of her expenses, and the father of her child, all while using funds designated for the college fund to pay for her luxury lifestyle. This is a lawyer's nightmare. The betrayal, the scandal, the fallout. He turned toward the door and said firmly, I'm calling campus security and the board now. This is a violation of every ethical guideline we have. This calls the entire foundation's integrity into question. We will need a full audit. But I wasn't done yet. I stood up and turned to Valerie, who was shaking slightly under the blanket. I wanted her to understand the depth of her arrogance. You thought sending me those photos would break me, Valerie? I said quietly, leaning down. You thought I'd send a check and walk away. You thought you'd step into my life, take my husband, and get an easy inheritance. But you never understood who I really am. I'm the one who handles the accounts. I'm the one who founded the college fund. I don't break. I fight. I'm the one who paid for this room. And I'm the one who has all the evidence. I stood up straight, turning my back on her. The scene was over. The stage was set. I didn't go straight home after the hospital visit. I needed a moment to process the sheer audacity of it all. Glenn, his mother Beverly, and now my stepsister Valerie, all wrapped up in this corrupt mess. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the building. Everything that had happened in the past 72 hours suddenly felt surreal, like I'd been cast in someone else's life, and I was just now stepping back into my own skin. Then my phone buzzed. It was Colleen. She's trending, Colleen said, without even saying hello. What? Trending for what? I asked, my heart hammering. Colleen sounded both amused and tired. One of the nurses posted a photo, said a university scholarship recipient was caught lying about being sick to hide a secret pregnancy. It's vague enough to be legal, but the internet's running with it. The local news websites are already picking up the scent of the ethical violation. I pulled up the post. Sure enough, there was a blurry shot of Valerie's hospital door with the maternity sign barely in frame. The caption read, "When you fake the flu to hide what you're really carrying." The comments were exploding. Most didn't know who it was about yet, but the drama was magnetic. That's when Colleen added, "We have a choice now, Meredith. You want this to die down quietly, or do we guide the story? The divorce proceedings will be much cleaner if the public knows why we're taking the business. This is your chance for a public promotion of your new status." I didn't hesitate. We guide it. We need to make sure everyone knows the truth about the college fund abuse. So we did. Over the next 2 days, Colleen and I crafted a meticulous letter to the university board. We listed all the ethical violations Glenn had committed, sponsoring a student he was sleeping with, using company funds for personal indulgence, and violating the foundation's integrity. The letter pointed out that the supposed scholarship college fund was being used as a slush fund for his mistress, who was also my stepsister. We attached redacted financial records and the initial photos as proof of commingling of funds. We sent copies to the press, not just the tabloids, but the real, quiet papers that covered local business news and university ethics. They did the rest. Articles started popping up, Ohio businessmen under investigation for scholarship misuse. Student caught in secret pregnancy scandal linked to mentor. And finally, photos leaked showing business leader in questionable relationship with 22-year-old stepsister. The photos, yes. I hadn't just let them rot in my inbox. I selected 10, only the 10 that showed absolutely no nudity, no inappropriate poses, just enough to imply everything without saying it. Photos of them holding hands, kissing over dinner, Glenn looking smug on a yacht. I made sure to include the photo with the business logo visible, and I posted them with a caption that went nuclear. When a woman sends you 70 photos expecting you to fall apart, you take a deep breath and let the world see what she's proud of. That post alone got over 200,000 shares in a weekend. My phone was vibrating constantly with friend requests, follows, and messages from old high school classmates who hadn't spoken to me in decades. My cousin, who had only sent question marks in the group chat, called me crying, saying she was so proud I finally stood up to Beverly and Glenn. But I didn't stop there. I wrote a blog post. Just one. It took me a full night, but it flowed out of me. Years of silence, finally finding a voice. I told the story from my perspective, not as a betrayed wife, but as a woman who had spent 10 years building something, putting up the initial inheritance, managing the accounts, raising the child, only to discover her partner was never really building with her. I wrote about love, about disappointment, about how betrayal doesn't always come in the form of a slammed door. It can come in smiling selfies from someone half your age, someone you grew up with. I wrote about the pain of seeing my inheritance drained for someone else's vacation. I didn't name names, but the internet connected the dots anyway. Valerie immediately deleted all her social media. Glenn went into hiding, turning off his phone. Beverly started calling my sister, trying to spread rumors that I was mentally unstable, but it was too late. Within a week, the scholarship board had announced an internal audit, and Glenn was forced to voluntarily step down from all public duties. The damage to his reputation, his salary, his entire professional image was catastrophic. I didn't feel triumphant, but I did feel seen. A few days later, Gail and I were at a park. She was chasing a butterfly, laughing so hard I thought my heart might burst. An older woman, maybe in her 60s, approached me while I was sitting on the bench. "Are you the one who wrote that piece? The one about the photos?" she asked. I read it on the Ohio Times website. I nodded slowly. She sat beside me. "You said exactly what so many of us never had the words for. My husband did the same thing to me when I turned 50. Left me for someone who barely remembered 9/11. And everyone acted like I should just be quiet and move on. Your article was like a firework. She touched my hand. Thank you for not being quiet. You got yourself a huge promotion in life. That night, when I checked the blog's inbox, it had over 1,000 messages. Most were from women. Some were angry, some were heartbroken, but all of them said the same thing in different ways: you made me feel less alone. That's when I knew this story wasn't about Valerie. It wasn't even about Glenn. It was about what happens when women refuse to sit quietly while someone tries to erase them. It was about choosing dignity when someone hands you humiliation. And it was about telling the truth, not to burn someone, but to light your own way out of the dark. The promotion I got was not in my job. It was in my life. The day the divorce was finalized, I didn't wear black. I wore a deep navy dress, the kind that made my eyes look like they had secrets to keep. Not because I wanted to be petty or theatrical, but because blue to me has always meant rebirth. The ocean, the sky, things that keep moving no matter who tries to hold them back. Glenn showed up to court alone. No lawyer, no Beverly, just him in a wrinkled button-down, looking like he hadn't slept in days. I didn't feel sorry for him, but I didn't feel vengeful either. He had made his choices, and now he had made mine. The judge reviewed everything calmly. Colleen had done an impeccable job presenting the financial negligence, the misuse of the college fund assets, and the ethical breaches with the university. We walked away with a full settlement of our shared assets, including a majority stake in the auto business I helped build with my inheritance. We secured full custody of Gail with supervised visitation rights for Glenn, citing his unstable and reckless behavior. More than enough to set Gail and me up for the life we deserved. More than enough to never look back. Outside the courthouse, Glenn tried to speak to me. Meredith, he said, his voice raw. I didn't think it would end up like this. This is unfair. My salary is gone. I nodded. That's the problem, Glenn. You never thought. You only acted. The unfairness started with the 70 photos. He reached out as if to touch my arm, then stopped. I didn't think you'd actually walk away. I thought we could still work it out. For Gail. Beverly said, you'd never be able to handle the house and the business. That made me pause. I looked him in the eye, the man who had dismissed me, lied to me, and betrayed me with my own stepsister. You thought I'd stay no matter what, I said, my voice clear. Because I always had. But here's the thing, Glenn. One day, even the strongest rope snaps if you keep pulling. Enjoy the silence, Glenn. I turned and walked away, my heels clicking like punctuation marks on the marble steps. Gail was waiting with my sister in the car. When she saw me, she clapped. Are we free now, Mommy? Can we get a puppy? I laughed, scooped her into my arms, and said, yes, baby. We are. We are absolutely free. The next few weeks were quiet. A strange, unfamiliar peace settled over our home. For the first time in years, I slept through the night. I made pancakes on Saturdays without thinking about who I had to please. I let Gail decorate the living room with crayon drawings and fairy lights. The house started to feel alive again. I used my newfound control over the business to hire a competent manager, and I shifted my focus to my editing career, which quickly led to a significant promotion. I spent several weekends packing up Glenn's things from the guest room. I didn't rush. I folded his shirts, organized his tools, and put everything into labeled boxes. It was a mundane process, but in its practicality, I found immense satisfaction. Each box was a step further away from the man who had wasted my time. I didn't want to see him, not even at Gail's school events. Colleen handled all the logistics of his supervised visits. Then one afternoon, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single photo, one of the 70 Valerie had sent me. It had a red X drawn through it, and on the back, just 4 words, I never saw it coming. There was no signature, but I didn't need one. I folded the photo in half, tossed it in the trash, and walked outside into the sun. Because that was the truth, wasn't it? They never saw it coming. They never imagined the woman behind the quiet dinners, the school drop-offs, the polite thank yous, and the folded laundry would be the same woman who could take her pain and turn it into power. They didn't think I'd share the photos. They didn't think I'd tell the story. They didn't think I'd be believed. And they definitely didn't think I'd win. But I did. And not just in court. I won in life. I won by refusing to let their betrayal define me. I won by reclaiming my voice. And I won by showing my daughter that silence isn't strength when someone steps on your soul. In the months that followed, the blog grew. More women wrote in. We started a small community. No big slogans, no grand mission, just truth, stories, support, a place to be heard. Sometimes we think revenge means destruction. But sometimes revenge is just telling the truth loudly enough that someone else sees themselves in it and stands up too. So here I am, still standing, still walking, still free. If you've ever been made to feel like your pain wasn't valid, like your voice was too small, or your story wasn't worth telling, I hope this reminds you that you are not alone. And if someone ever sends you 70 photos expecting you to break, I hope you remember you don't have to shatter. You can rise. And sometimes rising is the best revenge of all. Tell me, what was a moment in your life where you truly realized you had to fight for yourself? I'd really love to hear your stories in the comments below.